Hey everybody, welcome to the 138th episode of PRIMO NUTMEG. I'm your host, Steve. On today's show, it's my distinct honor and privilege to have Jim McCarty, a rock and roll Hall of Famer, and an original member of the legendary rock group, the Yardbirds. On today's show, we're going to relive the history of the Yardbirds, from their founding to their time as the house band at the Crawdaddy Club, from why Eric Clapton left the band after the success of For Your Love, to what helped the band become pioneers of psychedelic rock during the Jeff Beck years. We're also going to talk about how the music industry has changed over the years. It's a really fun and thought-provoking conversation, so please do stay tuned. Also, while you're listening, please do help support our show. Subscribe to the PRIMO NUTMEG YouTube channel, like the PRIMO NUTMEG Facebook page, follow PRIMO NUTMEG on Twitter and Instagram, and if possible, please become a patron for just $1 a month on Patreon. Yes, by going to patreon.com/PRIMO NUTMEG and pledging just $1 a month, you'll get access to hours and hours of forgotten content from our earlier seasons, and access to some of our most controversial shows. Thank you everyone for listening and supporting PRIMO NUTMEG, and now without any further ado, here's my interview with the legendary Yardbird, Jim McCarty. Jim McCarty, welcome to PRIMO NUTMEG.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. It's a sincere honor to have you on the program. You, of course, an original member of the Yardbirds. You've been a member of the Yardbirds for 55 years. You're a rock and roll Hall of Famer, so it's really an honor to have you on the show. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for that. So it's been a long time, but we did have a long holiday in between. You know, we split up in '68, and then we didn't get back together really until about '96. So we had a good holiday.
Let's talk about the formation of the Yardbirds, because I'd be really interested to hear, how did you meet the other original members of the band?
Well, Paul Samuel Smith and I were both at the same grammar school, or high school, as you say, and we knew each other well during our teens. So we lived locally. We lived in a place called Teddington, which is just southwest of London, about 15 miles. And we were always interested in music, and we were in the same school. And we used to play in the same sort of school group, playing old American rock and roll songs, Johnny Cash and Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers and all that stuff. Then after, we left school, we got back in touch. And I remember Paul said, "Oh, you have to come and hear this record, It's called he's called Jimmy Reed, and it's a record live at the Carnegie Hall." And I went round his house and listened to it, and I thought, well, this is fabulous music. I've never really quite heard that sort of music before. And this was the sort of music that we really got into then, and we used to go and see the early incarnation of the Stones. They used to play in that area in Richmond,
right?
Actually, where I am now. And then we all used to hang out in a pub in Kingston in Surrey. And to make a long story short, we all met up sort of round in the pub, and it was like a slightly bohemian sort of pub, lots of art school students and musicians, and we all got together. And it was actually Paul and I got together with three people from Kingston Art School. There was originally Topham on lead guitar, Chris Dreyer and Keith Rouse. They were all from the same art school, and we went from there.
So you brought up the Stones. As I understand it, they were the house band at the Crawdaddy Club, and then when they got some acclaim, the Yardbirds became the house band. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's right. And they started to get too big for the club, and they started to have hit records, and they were looking for another band. And we went to the promoter, Giorgio Gomelsky, who's a crazy Russian Swiss guy, and he came to see us rehearse, and he signed us up to play there.
What made the Crawdaddy Club special? Because, you have the Stones, you have the Yardbirds, and I imagine that just the culture at the time in the early 60s, there was some kind of magic in the air. How would you describe that club at the time?
Oh yeah, well there was a great magic, particularly in that area for some reason. I don't know why that was, but it was a very, the Richmond area, Richmond, Twickenham. I suppose a part of the reason we were we got on. We were in the right place at the right time. It all seemed to happen around around there. The Stones were originally from Kent, but they used to play in that area a lot. And there was also Eel Pie Island, where a lot of great bands used to play for many years, which was at Twickenham, which wasn't far away. And there were a lot of nice sort of gigs around, lots of action, a lot of great bands starting up, Pretty Things and the Kinks. They all used to play around that area too. It was just it was a great time.
So one of your first major songs was For Your Love, and as I understand it, Eric Clapton, he really had some problems with the song overall and thought it was a little too commercial. What was the experience like when you were writing the song with him? Did he voice his objections throughout writing and recording it, or was it really just once the song became a success that he started to have a problem?
Well, we didn't actually write it. It was a song written by Graham Gouldman, who was later in 10cc. He was a young prodigy writer from Manchester. And actually, we were playing with the Beatles at their Christmas show in 1964, which was down in Hammersmith in the same part of London we were living in. And we played there for a week, and somebody saw us play, and they had that demo from Graham. Mm. And, we all listened to it, and we decided to record it, and we did it, in a certain way with the harpsichord and the bowed bass. And Eric just thought we were stepping over the line. It was too far away from the blues. He wanted to keep in playing blues, and it was too much for him. And then at the same time, he had various difficulties with some of the group anyway. He couldn't quite get on, and he was always destined to be his own solo guy, really.
So after Eric Clapton left, you brought in Jeff Beck, and you folks started getting a little more experimental at that time. Some of the songs sounded a little more Eastern. You added the Gregorian chants, especially with Still I'm Sad. So where did you get the idea to utilize these kinds of techniques?
Well, I think we were always looking for something to be, something different, something original. We had a lot of different ideas, and we were listening to lots of different music, even though we loved the blues for that sort of music. We wanted to make it slightly different. We had put our own ideas into the pot. Jeff Beck was a totally different player to Eric. He had a lot of sounds at his fingertips, and he liked to play all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff, but he could play the blues as well, and he still can. And that was good for us, that we were experimenting and looking forward, looking to the future, trying to play something that was like futuristic or what we were having fun. It was all about having fun, doing something that was exciting and unusual.
Well, it was a funny kind of arc, I think, looking back, because the Yardbirds, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, you folks all started out doing this kind of R&B blues, got maybe slightly a little more poppy, and then kind of really went into this psychedelic phase. So what kind of drove that change? I mean, was it what the market was asking for? Was it the influence of drugs? Was it any changes in sort of musical technology? What led to that evolution over really a fairly short period of time?
I think there was a culture, there was a culture change going on. There was a lot of interesting things happening with that, younger generation. There were drugs around, all sorts of different art and photography and stuff, which was all happening. It was all very unusual, all coming at the same time. But we weren't relying on drugs. We were just having fun with the music, and we just wanted to make it a bit different. Wanted to get our own sound. We didn't want to be the regular 12-bar blues band. We wanted to make it a bit unusual and have fun. And everyone thought we were taking acid. When we came over to California, we couldn't believe it. They thought we were acid freaks or whatever. How do you make this sort of music without taking it? But we were pretty straight when we started.
Well, let's talk about that. So The Shapes of Things, for example, that's really credited as being one of the first major psychedelic rock songs. What was the writing process for that?
Well, we started with sort of a jazz bass riff, which we got off an old jazz record by Dave Brubeck, and we started on the bass, and then we put some simple chord progression over the riff, and then we had a sort of a middle eight section that we put a middle, the Come Tomorrow section, which was a modulation on the chords. And then we went into a sort of a Jeff Beck solo where we, slightly changed the tempo, galloped it off. I was responsible for that, really. And we all put our ideas in, and that's the way it came out. And I've always been quite proud of that one because it was a really great song, which was self-written by the band, and everyone played really well on it.
Well, again, I mean, you guys wrote some of the greatest songs of all time and performed renditions of some of the greatest songs of all time. Would you say that song is what you're most proud of? Or, I've spoken to other artists in the past and they say it's hard to rank what they've done, but I think that song in particular, that would probably stand out as one of the best songs that you guys wrote, right?
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, I'm very proud of that one. I think that was probably at the top. Over Under Sideways Down as well, and happening 10 years time ago. They were all good songs that we produced ourselves, and we came up with some good stuff, and definitely Shapes of Things is up there. I'm very proud to be part of that one.
So you mentioned going to California. 1965 was the first time that you toured the U.S. I'm just interested, what was that first experience like when you folks came over from the UK and you're touring the US? How are the crowds different? What was that experience like for you overall?
Well, I think, for the kids in the UK at that time, when living in London, it was a very drab sort of, it had been up to that time when it suddenly changed. It had been a very drab sort of place, it was very boring and dull, and sort of we had fog and real wet weather and everything, and we used to watch these movies about the US and all the cowboys and Indian stuff and the gangsters and all the beach movies and stuff. As soon as we came over there, it was it was a whole new world for us. It was so exciting, and I'm sure everyone would agree that was in a UK band that went to the States in those days. We landed in New York and we stayed in sort of on about the 20th floor somewhere and looked at all these fantastic cars, and then we go to California or Chicago where all the great blues guys were playing, and so it was very, very exciting for us.
And actually, here in Connecticut, where our show is based, there's kind of a funny story about you playing a high school here. You played Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut, and Steven Tyler had opened for you, and he says that he credits seeing you that night and opening for you as what really launched his career. Do you remember that concert in particular?
I'm very vague to remember. I know it's quite legendary, and I've seen people, posting it on Facebook and talking about it and posting the old posters for it, and very vaguely remember Stephen. And I think he sort of helped us for a bit. He was, he was very friendly with our roadie, Henry Smith, and I think Stephen helped carry our amps in and out and all that.
Really?
Which is crazy, isn't it?
Jeez.
Yeah. It's nice because people like him and Alice Cooper and Steve Vai and little Stephen, they're all big, well-known people now, but they're all Yardbirds fans, which is really nice for us.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that's kind of amazing about the Yardbirds, I think, because not only were you a great band, you also launched the careers of so many different rock legends, and you also influenced rock and roll profoundly, on its trajectory over the years. So, even though the band kind of dissolved around 1968, you had a long-lasting, profound influence on rock. So, I mean, that in itself must be something that you're very proud of as well.
Yeah, I am. The weird thing is that the music still sounded fresh. It just kept going. It didn't really date, and probably doesn't really date now. Maybe the sound is a bit dated because it was recorded, years ago. I think the songs still stand up, and when we play it now with a modern PA and everything mic'd up properly and a good sound, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful repertoire. It's sort of what really keeps me doing it.
Well, I do actually want to ask you about how the music industry has changed, because this is something that really fascinates me. I mentioned this actually on our last episode. I was born in 1986. However, I grew up not really liking the music from the late 90s, the 2000s. I look back to the music from the 60s, the 70s. That's really, I think, what was the most artistic, the most experimental, just the most intelligent, or far more intelligent than what we have today. So what do you think it was about the music of that era that made it so creative and experimental? And what do you think it was about the industry that allowed for it? Because I'm not sure what changed so much. I don't know if it was culture. I don't know if it was honestly the drugs that people were experimenting with. I don't know if it was maybe technology and the way that music technology evolved. Just how would you describe what has really fundamentally changed the music industry since the 60s and 70s up until today?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? There's lots and lots of things have changed, and not all for the better. I would say, but I think in those days, you were used to playing the stuff live, and you had to work quite hard before you got good enough. We used to play every night of the week, around and around the circuit. Playing until we were a good band. That wasn't something that just happened. We had to build the chemistry up between us and improve all the time. And I think that was the same with a lot of bands. The Animals, Kinks, and all our contemporaries. They all had to play really well as a live unit, and you couldn't really get away with any tricks in the recording studio. You just had to record it as it was. There wasn't much to improve really, or improve the sound in those days. You just got as good a sound as you could, and you had to play it as it was. And there were a lot of good bands. I don't know whether it's the same now. You can sort of cheat a bit. You can tune up your vocal, and you can program, a few guitar riffs or whatever, program the drums, have a digital drum track and all that stuff, which is all fine. And we still do that with some of our recordings. It's fun, but it's not the same. It's different, and the market's different. The way it's sold, digital downloads and all that stuff. Where the physical thing was always the main thing in the old days, and having that real old vinyl record with all the cover artwork and all that was great. That was all fun. You don't seem to have that so much now.
So I really did just want to ask you about the period in time when you actually had Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page in the band, because I imagine that having two of the greatest guitarists in rock history together in the band at the same time, that must have been really exciting, but also maybe a little crazy. I don't know if possibly confrontational. Can you just maybe speak to the chemistry of the band at that period in time?
Yeah, there were a lot of polarities. Actually, I do talk about it in my book, which is just coming out. So it's there in detail, but basically it could be either really exciting or really sort of a complete mess. There was a lot of ego stuff going on, a lot of competition between the two guys. But when it worked, it did work really well. And it was obviously something really special. And a few times it did work. I remember on various tours, it was something quite exciting. But it was a combination of sort of this self-discipline, getting the sound right, and being in different venues. Everything changed. Probably if we did it today with a modern sound system, it probably would be more the same of the night. But it was good and bad, but it was interesting. I wouldn't have done without it in my life, I must say.
So 1992 was the year that the band both was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and that you guys actually reunited. Was that kind of related? Did the band reunite because you were being inducted, or were they just unrelated events?
Well, they were unrelated really, Steve, but at the same time it sort of gave you a bit of confidence, and it made you think about things and thought, oh well, that's an honor. Then we were obviously in the public eye again, and obviously people liked us sort of. So we were confident enough to think about that, and it wasn't really until about 95, 96 that it all came together. And I was already playing in a sort of little blues band, and Chris Dreyer used to come and jam sometimes, playing in London again, and it was like the old days, And we got a call from an agent in England and wanted to know if we wanted to reform the Yardbirds and do some gigs and just go from there. So we went and did a few festivals and started it all up again, and it was working well. So we went from there.
And then in 2003, you guys released Birdland, which was your first album since 1967. I'm just curious, looking back, it's been 15 years since that album's release. How do you view Birdland in kind of the legacy of the Yardbirds?
I think it was a great idea because it was Steve Vai was right behind it. We were on his label, Favored Nations, and Steve, knew a lot of different guitar players, Joe Satriani and Jeff Baxter. A lot of these people came and played. Slash and Brian May. It was great actually, and all the guitar players played on the old tracks or new versions of the old tracks, and then we did the other half with new songs that we played with the lineup at the time, and we had a guy called Jippy Mayo playing the guitar. I thought it went together very well, and I think it's a very good album. It still stands up. Produced by a guy called Ken Allardyce, who was producer for Green Day and Weezer, some of the younger bands. And I think it was a success,
And you did actually bring up your book earlier, so you recently came out with a book. What gave you the idea to write this book?
Well, somebody approached me online about doing it some time ago, and I thought, well, it's probably a good idea because working with the current band, everyone wants to talk to me because I'm the only original, and so I have to come out with all these stories. So my mind is pretty well tuned into them, and so I thought, well, lots of people have said to me, oh, why don't you put these stories in a book? And so somebody contacted me and got the thing going a few years ago, and then we've been working ever since. And then I ended up working with a guy called Dave Thompson, that's an English guy living in America, English writer, and he's done a lot of other rock books. And it's just published now. It's out on lulu.com, so if you want one, you can get one from there.
Awesome. I'm sure it would be an amazing read. I'm sure there's lots of great stories in there.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun doing it, and I think it would be a good read for people.
And you also recently put out a solo album, so I just wanted to ask, how is that solo album different than what you're currently doing with the Yardbirds?
Well, it's very much the solo album. It sort of very much follows like the Renaissance-y, illusion-y feel to my music, So it's much more sort of singer-songwriter, troubadour type of thing, really based around the keyboard sound. It's my third solo album. I recorded it in Toronto, and it was very nice because I managed to work with Terry Brown, who's an English producer living in Toronto, and he's done a lot of Rush albums. And he even got Alex Lifeson to come and play on a track, so that worked really well. So I'm quite pleased with that.
So again, I mentioned our show is based in Connecticut, and you're actually coming to Connecticut. The Yardbirds are performing a couple of shows next month. You're playing Bridge Street Live in Collinsville on May 11th, and then you're actually also playing Mohegan Sun on May 12th. So for folks here in Connecticut, what can they expect when they go to see the Yardbirds at either of those shows?
Well, it's a great band. They're all American guys, apart from me. They know their Yardbirds songs backwards. They're very honourable to the old sound. They're all very great players, and we play the whole repertoire, which is pretty strong. All the old hits and
awesome.
All the some of the blues classics we covered, like Smokestack Lightning and Drinking Muddy Water, Train Kept A-Rolling, and so all those great songs are all in there, and it's a great band. It's very, very, very good.
Awesome. Well, I personally can't wait to see you. Again, you're playing May 11th in Collinsville at Bridge Street Live, and then May 12th at Mohegan Sun. Jim McCarty, thank you very much for being on Primo Nutmeg. I really do appreciate all of your time. Again, you and the Yardbirds have been a major influence in the history of rock and roll, so it was really a sincere honor. Thank you very much, and hopefully next time that you come through Connecticut, we can have you back on the show.
That'd be great. Thanks a lot, Steve. Pleasure.